Hi everyone, I'm Pattie Lovett-Reid. I am the Chief Financial Commentator for Home Equity Bank and the former Chief Financial Commentator for CTV News. It's a tough environment for Canadians right now when it comes to their money. Interest rates are rising, debt levels are soaring, the equity markets are volatile, the real estate market still out of reach for so many, and inflation stubbornly high. In an environment where you feel you have no control, I believe we do have some, and I think it's time to take charge now. That will be the focus once a week on this channel.
Hello, I'm really excited. It's Peter Merrick, and I'm speaking with Pattie Lovett-Reid. She has just launched a new YouTube channel, which I recommend everybody check out. It's called Take Charge Now with Pattie Lovett-Reid. Now, let me just share with you a little background on Pattie. I was so honored back in 2000 to be invited on her program, Money Talk, which was on BNN, which became Bloomberg, which is Canada's financial network. Pattie interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, and she has such a story to tell because she got involved in the financial service industry back in 1981. She's seen it all, and we're going to talk about a life well lived, and more importantly, Pattie talks about tips of how you can manage your money. I feel so honored because I don't believe, and this is just my opinion, someone's asked Pattie to reflect back on her journey in the financial field in Canada. And as my memory serves me, Pattie, you are a fellow CFP. Pattie, thank you so much for joining with me.
Thank you, Peter. You're right. I have not been asked to reflect back on changes that literally have happened over decades. And it's really funny, Peter. So often people will say to me, have the markets bottomed out? Where do you see interest rates going? And, I can't tell you that. I have no idea, and I really don't. I've seen patterns, but what I can tell you is that I've been through a lot of ups and downs, and the biggest mistake people make time and time again is letting their emotions dictate their decisions on a whole host of things, as opposed to sort of standing back, and when the hardest thing in the world is to do nothing, sometimes it's the most beneficial.
I remember everyone says it's like it's different, and I've been in the business since 1991. And I remember I had a client who had a little difficulty reading, and he had an annuity that he bought in 1981. And he took about $200,000 of his money. He was in his 90s when I was dealing with him, and he put it into an annuity. And you can imagine what he was receiving on that. He was getting enough to live on. And I remember turning to him and said, how did you know to buy in 1981? He said, Peter, most of my life, interest rates were less than 5%. He had perspective. I remember thinking about that because I'm thinking, wow. Now they were calling him and sending letters to him every year to prove that he was still alive, because they did not like the fact that they were paying 19% plus the capital.
Yeah. Tremendous. But when you get a moment like that, it's crystal clarity for him. He knew the number one fear that so often people have, and this gentleman had longevity on his side, he was in his 90s, is the fear of outliving their money. And so understanding where your money's coming from and how long your money can potentially last, particularly if you live too darn long. People want options. And unfortunately, in today's environment, we have a looming, in my opinion, retirement crisis. People have been living very close to the margin. Real estate has been very pricey. There is not a lot of financial wiggle room for a lot of households. And people think, okay, down the road, I'll worry about retirement, or I guess I'll just work forever. But here's the thing. you may not have that option to work forever. Your employer may dictate otherwise. Your health may dictate otherwise. A family situation could dictate otherwise. And so, you know, I applaud a gentleman like that, you know, seizes an opportunity when it presents itself.
I've got a question because I want to go back to perspective, and wisdom only comes through living it. I remember this statement that says a picture's worth 1,000 words. I'll add that an experience is worth 1,000,000,000,000 of those. It's nothing like if it's in our muscles and our bones and it's there. So you started in the financial industry back in 1981. Why did you decide to go into the financial markets? Why did you decide to go into banking?
Well, that's very interesting. I do not have a university degree. I graduated grade 12 from a secretarial program. I would have made the world's worst secretary or administrative assistant. There's no question. I would have pushed back on everything. So at that point, I went into the bank. And true story, Peter, the day I walked into the bank for an interview for a teller's job, it was being robbed. And so in the middle of a robbery, they asked me to stand to the side. There were two candidates. And I said to one of I said to them, I'll wait till after the police leaves for my interview. And they said, we've just been robbed. No, come back on Monday. So that happened to both of us. The other candidate did not come back. I did. I got the job. I thought I was the best candidate. Turns out I was the only candidate. And then I did get the job. But I started in the bank as a teller. And I had some limiting beliefs, Peter. I thought because I didn't have a university degree, I am dyslexic. So reading a teleprompter, I never did on national television. I would just learn the content and go from there. But what I found was I'd start as a teller and I'd go, I want that job. I want that job. I want that job. Because I found that in the financial services arena, things were opening up daily to the point where you and I have chatted that I walked into a mutual fund call center. I had 250 representatives on the phone that reported to me. And it was just starting. And we were launching a science.
What year was that?
I wish I could tell you.
Was it 1990 or something?
Roughly. But what I can tell you is that mutual funds, no one really talked about them. Like they were sort of there, but they weren't there. Then the banks got into it. But then it was all of a sudden sector oriented. And science and technology was taking off. And literally, we could not keep up with the demand. We couldn't keep up with the demand. And it was a phenomenal time to be in that space, getting people who managed their own money well enough to be on a hotline to deal with individuals calling in about their money. And so, yeah, it was a thriving environment.
It was a crazy time. Just to give a perspective to our audience, the mutual fund industry in 1990 in Canada was $24 billion. And by the end of the decade, it was $600 billion.
Yeah.
And I often joke because I was a beneficiary of that. Like I decided not to go to law school because I graduated during the recession. And for American friends to become a lawyer, you have to apprentice for a year before you can write the bar. And I had friends who were this is a very Canadian word I'm going to teach you. I found out they don't use it in America. A keener. They got into law school after.
Wait a minute, I'm a keener.
I swear to God, it's like I didn't know until I used it here. Keener means they were really keen on doing it. I just want to share. It means exactly what it sounds for American friends listening. And they couldn't get into articling jobs. And I was about to start law school and I started working at a brokerage firm. And it was like the early 1990s.
It was insane.
And it was like back then we talked, Patty, when you were saying, I have nothing really to add. I said, no, you don't know what you've observed. I joke that like I'm a beneficiary of the markets just going up because I knew nothing. All I did is walk in and ask someone, do you have investments? And they would confuse their investments with GICs. They said, well, I don't have investments, but I have RSPs. And they would talk about what they earned. And I said, well, no, what's in your RSP? And they didn't know. There was no sophistication.
Well, I can also tell you, Peter, at that time, there was quite an evolution because as we were moving out of the mutual fund arena, or I was, and continued to grow. Many of the financial institutions, particularly the one I was involved in, wanted to go after the women's market.
Yes.
And excuse me, back then, what we saw when you talk GICs sitting in cash, women would say to me, it's not that I lack the knowledge or the sophistication. What I lack is time. And so while initially it was a safe bet to take any money and park it in a GIC, over the following decade, and I've written a number of books targeted to women and money, children and money, retirement strategies, that sort of thing. I have watched that evolution, and women have come a long way. They have the earning power. They obviously have greater potential, but they also want to make their money work as hard for them as they're out there working for it. Doesn't mean they have to do it alone. And so you've seen this sort of embracing of wealth management in its entirety.
And it really is a generational thing, because I know for my mother comes from a silent generation. And my father died at 59. My mother is now 82. Like, my father saved, you know, like all his acorns. And my mother is the one who never really thought about planning. This is something she found herself in. So there's just so much taking responsibility, because I once was told by someone that I had a better chance getting a gold watch from someone selling it on the street than I did from the company that I was employed by.
Oh, well, isn't that the truth though? Yeah, but people often don't leave companies, they leave managers. And we've seen more and more of that. I would argue my mother is 90. My biological father died when she was 36. He was 36, she was 35. And she became a single mom. And she knew her way around a balance sheet. When my mother remarried, and when my stepfather passed away, who, by the way, I can't even give you a wicked stepfather story because he was a great guy. I said to Mom, based on my background, don't worry, I will manage your money. And she said, stop. I may not have managed it. It doesn't mean I'm not capable. And if I want your help, I will ask for your help. I went, okay. And she meant it. She did put powers of attorney in place for both my brother and I. Yes. And my advice to anyone listening is you put that in place at least 5 years before you ever even need it. But 10 years preferably, which is what she did. And as I said, Mom is on the cusp of 90. She still manages her money. And if she needs help, she will ask. And she rarely asks, let me tell you.
Yes. And that's important, people being independent. That's why people save. The worst thing is to become dependent on family, on government. And this is really what money really allows someone to have control and choice. That's really what it is.
Yes.
And that is a key. So I want to go back. So you were in the mutual fund, you were managing 250 people. And then because the financial industry was growing and the population was getting more educated and people wanted to do it themselves, and there was a .com boom that happened, and people had unrealistic expectation. I think that just happened recently with crypto and everything. And when you live long enough, it's always the same, right? Everyone says it's different. This time is different. I'm sure it was like that when plastic first came out. It's never, because human beings are the same. And so how did you get approached to be on national television to talk about, speak to people about finance and actually interview hundreds and hundreds of experts on
It's actually a very, very quick but very funny story. I was in the mutual fund business. It was the last day of our registered retirement savings season, RSP season. The local television station had come in to interview my boss on how unprecedented sales were, and money was pouring into RSPs. He looked at me and said, I don't have time for this. They got to go. He left the room, and they had already set up. They had to go live that evening. And so they looked and they said, we have to have content. Like, he agreed to it. I said, he has left the building. They said, do you know anything about mutual funds? And I said, oh yeah. I mean, I wrote all his content for him. And they said, okay, they put the mic on. Next thing you know, I'm on television. And then it wound up going on the national that night, only to have my boss say, you didn't do that interview. But it's typically my style. Go ahead and do it and beg for forgiveness later, yes. Which is basically, what happened there. But it opened up doors. You see, I've always, and the reason I was hesitant to speak with you, yes, I've seen ups and downs. And, I know, here's a classic example of the main index in Canada over the last 30-year period. If you had invested $10,000 and left it in the S&P TSX that whole period, you'd have over 60,000 at the end of December of last year. If you miss just 1% of the best trading days because you think you can time the market or you let your emotions get involved, just 1% of the best trading days over that period, you would have, that $10,000 would be worth about $3,700. So the adage, Peter, that I've always believed, and I've seen time and time again, it isn't timing the market, it is time in the market. And the biggest financial crisis I personally went through was 2008. And when Lehman Brothers was allowed to collapse, I was walking through the downtown financial district in Toronto, and I knew a lot of the players. And I would ask them, guys, how are you feeling about this? And they would look at me and they go, I don't know. I don't know. Money froze up. It didn't move because you didn't know where the next shoe was going to fall or what was going to happen next. And that was a period where, you're watching for the indicators that things are going to start to turn around. And they did in March, but it took time. And that's when I saw people who moved literally billions of dollars in the financial district were kind of paralyzed.
One of the things that I would step back from, and I would read studies, and hopefully in those moments, because that's really what preparation is all about, right? For those moments of chaos, does that trading kick in? And I remember there was a study that I read on Marty Schwag. He was a top fund manager, and his funds averaged about 17, 18% compound. And they looked at the distribution. There were people buying direct. There were people who were buying through an advisor. So his rate of return was 17 compound for the entirety of his fund. The average person going through an advisor was averaging 12.5%. And the average person going direct was negative 2.7. And that is exactly your point, where it's never about timing, it's about time. And more so the industry that you've been, people like turned to you towards was the financial planning field, because that was something that no one really knew what that was.
That's so true, because, financial planning, no one really, what does it mean? And why do you want to have a designation? Because still, it's fairly unregulated. Anyone can put up a shingle and call themselves a financial expert. And in today's environment, I'm not so sure that people are accepting that to the same extent. The biggest, qualifier for me being in the industry is that I like the idea of having to take an ethics exam every year and a qualifier, so that it takes you back to the basics. And to me, that's part of the value proposition, which is why I have maintained my designation. I don't actually practice as a financial planner anymore, but I do feel I owe it to people, whether it's on my YouTube channel, which has only just been launched, but I'm having so much fun just sharing information that I want people to know that I take it very seriously. And the tips that I'm trying to share The reality is I've been through it all. So, I can talk about the biggest investing mistakes people make. I can talk about when is a good time to ask for a raise and when might not be a good time to ask for a raise. How do you land your dream job? I'm just going to put one up in the next week or so. Oh, actually, it's going to go up tomorrow on, do you go variable rate mortgage or fixed term mortgage? And, it's not either or, like one's better than the other. It's how do you determine what's right for you? And that's what pretty much this whole business is about. What makes sense for you?
And I agree. I really believe that it's a starting point. There's a code of ethics, and there's also continuing education that the individual has to have. Right. I remember when I started and I was selling mutual funds, there was no requirement to have E&O. Then when you think about that, it's like, whoa, would you drive a car without insurance? Like literally, it was the Wild West. Yeah. It was a great time. And I'm thankful that the markets just went up, because I'm still standing by the time I actually realized that I had to learn something. Yeah. Now, Pattie, you had conversations with thousands of people. Are there anyone that you spoke to, you interviewed, that made you step back and say, wow, I never thought of it that way? And it was a fundamental paradigm shift for you when they shared an insight. And it's like, I know that sometimes I've spoken to people where I've heard myself, that because I spoke out loud, I heard myself what I was saying. And sometimes people say things that make me stop. And then everything changes, my outlook towards everything, because they've said something that just turned it. And it was for
you know what it is for me, and I think you touched on it earlier. The line for me that stands out the most: boring is beautiful. And so I kind of thought, okay, I want to be a boring person then, because boring is beautiful. I am not looking for excitement in my portfolio. Right. I'm looking for slow and steady to win the race. Yeah. I am now at a phase, and I know when I'm talking to people, you may be in wealth accumulation mode or wealth preservation mode, but be realistic about your returns. And when it comes to your portfolio, that you are investing for a goal that matters to you, that excites you, you want boring, good quality companies that are leaders in their industry, that pay a dividend, that increase their dividend, and they continue to grow their business. Well, that's not really boring, but you understand what I'm saying. I mean, you can look at some of these areas where something takes off like a rocket, and then you look at it and you think later, okay, this was not a leader in this business. They had tremendous debt. It wasn't sustainable what they were doing. So the biggest defining moment was look for excitement outside of your wealth creation. Right. Go ahead, have fun there. Slow and steady wins the race when it comes to your money.
So your biggest mentor was actual experience and observation.
Yeah, to some extent. But I do recall, it's never boring making money. I don't think it's in bad taste to talk about money. I enjoy it. I enjoy earning it. That's why I like this whole this is the first time in my life, Peter, I've been sort of an entrepreneur. The hustle's real, by the way. I mean, I've never had to do that. I've always worked for large corporations where they've come to me and said, Pattie, we want you to work for us. And I go, oh, okay, great. Here I am like little Pollyanna. But I can tell you on the other side, now, if I want to do something, if I want to partner with someone, it's a hustle. You have to go out and do it. And it's a new skill set. I love it.
I lived that world my entire life.
I know you have. I haven't.
I would never hire me. Like, that's it. I'm just not hireable, because my curiosity would get me into trouble. I'll share you a story and you were very influential on my books, because I remember my last book, we were sitting and talking. It was The King of Main Street. And I'm saying someone else should write it. And you looked at me and you said, and this was the last time we were interviewed, you said, well, it sounds like you should write it. And I did eventually write it. It was a lot more work than my textbooks that I'd written, because it was a life on its own. That being said, being able to choose who you play with. And let me share with you a story. There was a book that I read by these two brokers at RBC. And I thought it was just so great. And I went to one of them and I said, will you write a chapter in my books? Because my books were not written by me. My last textbook was 1,200 pages. Never read it. Well, I had to because I was the editor.
Yeah.
But I went to this broker and I said, let's do it. And he says, yeah, I'd like to do it. And then he goes to compliance. So I'm now having a senior moment, right? I'm stuttering. Compliance. And they say, okay, we want to see the whole manuscript. And I turned to him and I said, I like you. I don't work for the bank. And that was the end because I didn't have to ask permission. One of the reasons I gave up my securities license is because I didn't like all the rules that were happening. And I discovered if I focused in the business section, I could sell almost every single investment with the fraction of like people watching over me with an insurance license. Yeah. And it was that.
But I would argue with you that compliance has always been my best friend.
Right.
All the books that I've written, and I did work for a financial institution when I did them. I always say they kept it pure. They kept it right. And if, you know, I didn't step over the boundary, but if I said, this is the very best, they go, well, it might not be the very best, but this is a good consideration, that sort of thing. I
can appreciate that, Patty. But at the same time, I'm just hearing that you're saying, well, I can go out and it's like, okay, you and I want to do something together. It's going to be your feeling, your track record, my track record, and an opportunity. There's not going to be someone who says, well, we can't do that.
Right. And I thoroughly enjoy that. What I will also say, what I'm noticing is that, you know, the book, Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote Lean In.
Yes.
This is Age In, where people do not want to move to the sidelines. People, I grew up in the bank as a teller. I retired from a financial institution from a teller to a senior vice president. I started as a reporter at CTV and I retired as the chief financial commentator. And now on my Instagram, like, I don't even know how it happened. I woke up one day basically, and I have about 37,000 followers. And okay, I don't have that many on YouTube, but it could happen. And the thing is, people want relevancy and they have money. I know everybody's going after a younger demographic. That's what they want. That's where they want to target. Well, why not target the people who have time, experience, and money and build out on that? So I'm going to push back on it. And I'm going to say, this is my third career. It's going to be in social media somehow, but because we can. And I always think, Peter, honestly, the next best thing or big thing is right around the corner. You just have to embrace it.
I have an image in my head, and this is maybe it drives my wife crazy, but I think I'm Charlie and I'm going to turn the corner. That's what gets me up, and I'm going to find my golden ticket.
There you go.
And you have to be an optimist.
Oh, yeah.
Actually get up and move forward.
But you also have to, the Stockdale paradox, you have to confront the brutal facts and the reality of where things are at. So, you know, the Stockdale paradox, which would suggest that those and I'm paraphrasing, in a prisoner of war camp, the ones who didn't get out died of a broken heart. They always felt that they were going to get out by Thanksgiving, by Christmas, and it didn't happen. But there were others that said, these are the facts, and we still will get out. Definitely paraphrasing the Stockdale paradox here. But the point is being realistic, but still you can move forward and you can believe.
Oh, for sure. And that's, you know, I joke about entrepreneurship. An individual gives themselves the greatest gift of all, the potential to self-actualize, because you're rubbing up against the environment and it's easy to fail and it's hard to get up. And that's where people show their stamina. And it's sort of like walking barefoot. Eventually your feet get
toughen up,
and you don't get too excited, and you're a realist. However, you have to have a level of optimism similar to becoming a parent. You have kids, you believe the world is going to be better. It's like it's being a form of optimistic rather than saying I'm not having children because the world's ending.
Yeah.
Pattie, how is your social media? Like, let's talk about the transition, because you were a friendly face when I would turn on television. I would see you all the time. And now you've moved over to social media. So how has that transition been for you? Because let's face it, I knew nothing about this technology before 2008,
I know.
before the great, like I heard about these things. I remember there was a shooting in Georgia at some polytechnical school, and it was like 2006. And they were talking about, yeah, people knew what to do because of this Facebook thing. And I'm going like, what's this Facebook thing?
Yeah. Well, I will be honest, when I grew up in the bank, they didn't want me on Facebook because they felt I would be a target because I was sort of the face and the voice for wealth management.
Right.
And they said, you'll get every complaint in the world targeted to the bank, to you. So I never did. I was very late to the game. I literally joined Instagram in 2012. I said to my son, who can you help me set up Instagram? He looked at me and said, absolutely not. I said, oh, why? And he said, because what are you going to post? And I said, well, I'm going to post every day. And he went, absolutely not. And I said, no, I think I am. I said, I've done enough research. And so I'm going to focus in on the things that matter to me: family, fitness, finance, and have some fun. And so it'll be different, but it'll be in the realm, there'll be business. Like I do a daily business market update. Here's what's happening in the markets today, because I'm fascinated by it. But I also have 5 grandchildren, all boys, a girl coming in December, and I will post them. Thank you. But then on the other hand, I will fitness. I own more Pelotons than I even care to acknowledge. Not the stock, but I'm just saying that. So anyway, he said, no one is going to follow you. And I said, game on, Dave, game on. If you, let's just see.
How old was Dave?
How old was Dave? It was, okay. So it was a decade ago. So he was 25. He said he's 35. And so in any event, he was at a presentation I was giving. And I said, do you follow me on Instagram? And he said, Mom, you can't ask people to follow you. That's not how it works. It's organic. They'll find you and they follow you. And I said, oh, to heck with that. Who said those are the rules? So those types of social media norms, forget about it. I do post every day and I enjoy posting. And the feedback, I have an engaged audience. I've never bought a follower. I get asked every day by social media experts for X amount of dollars. We guarantee you this number of followers. No. That's not how I want to build a community that people will pay attention to. And those that I've only just started, I will tell you, doing ads. And I will do ads that I believe in, that I am aligned with. Some people from mutual funds have come to me and said, or it could be about interest rates or credit cards, the things I know about. I'm not going to be out there promoting skin product. That's not me. That's not what I'm about.
No, I think that's fantastic. So I'm listening, you start talking about health now, which is something that you weren't really focused on.
No.
And you also have more choice too, because when you were with a large institution, TD, they said, Pattie, this is the flavor of the month and this is what we want you to focus on. And now you're able to say, well, that's not my flavor.
Well, it's not my flavor because you know what? Yes, I think wealth is important, but if you don't have your health, like you've got nothing. Yeah. So I always think if you can solve a problem with money, you really don't have a problem.
Fully agree.
Yeah.
Fully agree. And I know that firsthand. As I shared with you, I ignored my body until my body told me, well, I showed up in the hospital and they told me that if I hadn't shown up, I probably would have gone into a coma because I had internal bleeding, and I knew it and I ignored it. So my hemoglobin was at 54. And the doctor looked at me and said that it should be like 130. It was at that point I stepped back and I said, you know, whatever I'm doing, it's not working for me.
Right.
And to make a fundamental change for an individual, and that's sometimes the hardest thing for people to do.
Yeah,
They either life makes that choice for them,
yeah,
and they're able to leave the house walking, or life will make that for them and they're going to leave in a gurney. And everyone has to have that, like that realization that we're only promised today. We have to think of tomorrow, but today is important.
Yeah, I agree, Peter. Wow.
And I look at that background that you have. Can you describe where you are right now, Pattie? Please. It's gorgeous and it's real. Next time we talk, I'm going to be a mile from me is the Pacific Ocean, so I'll compete with you for a background. But that is so picturesque and beautiful.
You know what? We have a family cottage that we built in Muskoka. And then we have a condo in downtown Toronto, but my daughter lives across the street and she just gave birth to her second little boy. And we were out walking and she said, Mom, and then she looks at Dad, just sort of winks at him because he's already on side. You should take some money out of the market. This is a great diversification play. It's waterfront property. You'll never lose value. And you'd be right across the street and we'd love to have you here. And I went, oh. And, you know, quite frankly, can I tell you what a great play it was? Because we took money out of the bond market back in April and we used some money from our fixed income because we figured this is kind of like that sort of asset. The portfolio is the same. We got a great deal on it. And we didn't experience the downturn in bonds. And it was not because I'm brilliant. It was because it was just great timing. And it's great. We love it. We love it. It is a little much. I have to admit, I am a little extra. Yeah.
No, it's gorgeous. Like I'm just staring at it and I'm thinking, Pattie, you're a beautiful woman. You have competition with that, with the view I see out the windows. It's absolutely
Peter, you know what? I was hesitant to chat with you because I really didn't think with where my life has landed and the focus that I now have would resonate with you. But I will say you did cause me to pause and realize that, you know, we've been through the Asian currency crisis. We've been through stock market. We've been through COVID. We've been through 9/11. I'm jumping all over 2008, the dot-com bubble. We've been through a lot, and yet we're resilient, and we've seen economies and markets bounce back. And so I go back to, you know, set a goal, get excited. It's your life. And stick with a plan. Those plans that we have, they're not carved in stone. If life throws you a detour or a financial curve, that's okay. Take corrective action. But if you don't have a plan, you don't even know how to take or where to take that corrective action.
Well, one of the things I've learned from our conversation here is there's been all these major changes where people thought the world was going to end.
Right.
And we're talking, you and I are talking in 2022, in 1981, with high interest rates, when you first started working for the bank and being a teller and selling those GICs for 19%, right?
Oh, it's goodness. Like, my mortgage was at 18-19%.
Wow. And then you got the dot-com bubble where everyone was saying, oh, it's different now. You know,
I was one of the ones that said that.
Yeah, it's like, it's different now.
Yeah.
That change happened. And then we had 2008 in the housing market, not so much in Canada. Canada fared quite well during.
It did okay. But money dried up for sure.
Money dried up. People thought the world was over then. Always think the world is going to end. And it might end. We have to plan that it's not going to end today. And it's not going to end tomorrow, because what happens if it doesn't end? And at the same time, we have to plan. And you've been fantastic, Pattie, because I want to thank you. This has been very helpful, because I was interested in speaking with you because you had a unique perspective. You joined an industry before it was an industry.
Yeah.
And now it's an industry
it.
that everyone, like a CFP, are you a certified financial planner? Are you a CFA? These are terms that no one knew.
Yeah, no, you're right. No, it's definitely been an evolution. Peter, thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank you. This is the first time I got to interview you. So thank you.
Okay,
so
this
much,
is where
Pattie.
I get to sign off then. Peter, thank you so much. And you better follow me on Instagram.
I'm going to be promoting you. Pattie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the greatest healer for anybody later on in life is to mentor younger people. And I find this all the time. I sit down with business owners all the time, and they always give me unsolicited advice because they want to share their knowledge, and it's really important.
Here with me is Peter Merrick,
president of merrickwealth.com.
Peter is an income and capital enhancement consultant,
speaker, and author.
He is also a
recognized expert in the world of succession planning.
There's over 800 published articles and 3 industry textbooks.
He's a Canadian who joins us today from San Diego, California. Thanks for joining us.
So, Peter Merrick, tell us about you.
Well, I've been in the financial service industry since the end of 1991. I graduated during the recession. The baby boomers were in their positions, so there was no jobs. So the two businesses that opened up were the technology field and the financial field. It was the Wild West in both of them. So I had this brilliant idea, and I had a friend of mine, and we started talking, and I said, hey, how difficult would it be for us to get a mutual fund dealer license? Not difficult enough. Thank God for those 10 years, the market just went up. I would sit down and I would take somebody's entire life savings that they spent 15, 20 years accumulating it, this young kid who knew nothing about nothing, and I would go and just invest it, and luckily it went up because the markets were crazy in the 90s. It was a boom time. But in 2004, my life blew up. I almost went bankrupt, but I was very fortunate because there were very few CFPs at the time, but every university in Canada wanted to offer the CFP program. So I got recruited as a prof. And it was great. I was reading all the textbooks. I would call all the big publishers. And what I came to the conclusion was the succession planning was missing. One of the issues is there was very little talking beyond the accumulation stage. Like, how do you have a healthy life after you've done that? I also looked at demographics. At the turn of the 20th century, the average life expectancy in the West and North America was 43 years old. And people are dying at 83. No one ever lived to 83.
Well, so I always say that there's two financial plans. There's the financial one that we work on, and there's the what you get to do with all your time and that energy once you're done. And with this thing that they've been racing towards, they've hit it. But if they haven't thought about what they're going to do after or how they're going to feel validation for their existence, they just never stop. They just keep going.
Well, it's not anybody's fault because when people are young, they focus too much on doing. And later on in life, they have to focus on being. So I wrote my own textbooks because I thought it was very important to talk about how do you transition from the first half of life, which Carl Jung called it the mourning, where you're accumulating, whether it's your ego, designations, education, houses. The second half is deconstruction, giving wisdom away, giving away my money, giving away my time, leaving a legacy.
So talk to me about that stage. What's the purposeful way or kind of the best practices, ways, or considerations for people to take when transitioning into that stage of life?
Well, one, decide whether or not you want an exit. I find between the ages of 55 and 70, a lot of people feel that I'm just tired doing the same thing that I've always done. And I have the money now. So maybe I should get out when the going is good and pass on my business to someone who's got the energy to navigate it. Number two, who are you going to sell your business to? There's one issue about selling it to a family member or an employee. What happens after you sell it? Things don't go right. A lot of business owners want to sell their business because they just want to wash their hands. But by selling it to someone you know, you're not getting out of your business. The best is to sell to a third-party purchaser. The last one is after they make that transition from being a business owner, building a nest egg for themselves to have choice, they don't know what they're going to do. I've spoken to people who say, you know, I'm going to take up golf. So my question is, do you golf now? I don't golf now. So what makes you think you're going to golf later? I just want to share with you guys a story. There was a gentleman, his name was Bob Hunter. He was quite a celebrity. He started Greenpeace during the height of my blow up when I was going through business laws. He was bringing me on national television. And you know what he was doing? He was saying, so Peter, don't you do that? And then he would give my phone number and he would give my web address. The reason why it went by merrickwealth.com because it was almost like a phone number that would run across the television and I could actually see myself making money off of it. And he was dying. He had prostate cancer. And he turned to me and said, Peter, one day you will be in a position that you'll help someone else. And let me share with you about the legacy. Bob's been dead for 16 years. And I'm sharing you the legacy of Bob Hunter because he made a difference for me. And if I make a difference in anyone else's life, I'm a product of those people who are willing to do things and they had no expectations. And a true mentor is someone who has no expectations that they're going to see the tree blossom. The reason I wrote The King of Main Street is younger people don't know how to find the right mentors, and older people have this need to mentor. It's almost like a biological need because they can see beyond their physical existence. They know that the sun was here before them and it will be after them and what's going to be left behind that they leave. I would joke, I can't make you money, but I can definitely save you money. What I mean by that is I am a Sherpa. That's someone who would guide someone to help them come down. But I realize the most precious asset they have is not their money. It's their time.
What last piece of advice would you like to give our listeners?
If you have a business, the most important thing to ask yourself is, why did you get into the business? And it's usually not to create a legacy, it's to create the lifestyle that you want. And at that point, ask yourself, what do you want to do during your last days? The last human freedom is to choose one's own beliefs, one's own way. Everything else you can have taken away from you. But what you believe and how you choose to act in the world, that is yours. And the greatest healer for anybody later on in life is to mentor younger people. And that is going to give you fulfillment emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. You guys have been wonderful, and I want to thank you, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.